Hey everyone, my name is Blake and I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. I've been clean and sober this time around since the 14th of June of 21. I'm extremely grateful for that. I want to start off by saying thank you to the two people that went ahead of me, Joni and Kristen both. Thank you for sharing your experience, strength, and hope with me and everybody else in here. I'm very blessed to have known Joni through her journey, and Ernie, of course. That 22-year-old kid in treatment, 90 miles an hour, did not know he had undiagnosed ADHD, but that was very quickly figured out. So I'm just going to start off, what life was like, what happened, and what it's like now. For me, I have to dive a little bit earlier in my life before the alcoholism and the addiction set place. I grew up in a really small town. There was one stoplight. There were less than 500 people in the town. And the town right next over where I went to high school had 3 stoplights. And so we were definitely moving up in the world. And so, one of my earliest memories is I was in kindergarten, and the teacher was going around, and she was asking everybody what we wanted to be when we grew up. Of course, as little kids, everybody's saying, I want to be a cowboy, I want to be an astronaut. And it comes to me, and I told her, I said, all I want to do is be a good dad. Little 4-year-old Blake already figured out that, I was raised by 2 loving parents, and my dad, to this day, and my mom been married 30 plus years, and he worships the ground that she walks on. And that's all I wanted out of life. In turn, I had that mindset through everything I did. I was a very caring, loving person. And so whenever my alcoholism really took off, which I guess at that point it wasn't really alcoholism, it was just growing up experimenting. I saw my dad drink. The last time I saw him drink, I was in the 3rd grade, and I didn't see him drink again until my sister went off to college, because he was raised by an alcoholic, and he didn't want his kids to grow up in that. And so their motto was, well, you can go do whatever, but you have to come home, thinking Blake's not going to drink and drive. Actually, no, Blake's going to try to rewrite the book on drinking and driving, and it's not going to end very well for him. And so that's what I would do, right? At first, I would drive, go hang out with friends, because I wanted to take care of everybody. You need a water? I've got a water. You need a ride home? I'll be your ride home. Because I wasn't going to drink, right? And then that in turn turned into, well, why not just be this sober person in front of everybody and then go drink by yourself? And this is an embarrassing story. I don't share it very often. But growing up in a small town, everybody always talks about going and drinking on turn rows. And I lived around a lot of cotton fields. And so, if you know, cotton does not stand very tall. So whenever you go park on a cotton turn row, you can see you for miles. And so I would be this 15, 16-year-old kid, not even have a license yet, sitting out there drinking. And everybody's like, we know what your pickup looks like. You're one in like 600 people in this town. We know where your parents live. So by the time I get home, everybody knows what's going on. And so, it was very stagnant. It would progress, it would slow down. It would progress, and then it would slow down. I was very athletic growing up. I was a long-distance runner. I ran track. Started playing football. I realized I like to fight more than I like to play football, so that didn't last very long. And then I remember vividly, I was running cross country one day, and I got second. And, for me, my fear of failure is very, very, very prominent for me. I got second, and I never wanted to do it again. But at the same time, it was very hard for me to even try to get first. because my mentality was I'm afraid of failure, but I'm also afraid of success. Because if people see me succeed, then they're going to expect that of me every single time. And whenever I fall short, I'm going to get ridiculed for it. And so, I mean, that happened. And I was like, well, I'm not going to run anymore. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. Where I went to high school, there were 27 kids in my class. And I came out number 25. And I always like to say it's because number 26 was my best friend, and I kept him distracted so I would seem smarter. And then number 27 got pregnant midway through the year, and then they come back and walk the stage. And so, gotta love it. Grateful for those two. And so, I got out of high school, and let's rewind a little bit. About 2 weeks before graduation, I'd already gotten accepted into West Texas A&M University in Canyon, and 2 weeks before graduation, we had a military recruiter come to school. And I was never really one for an education. I was never really one that liked to learn. And I had this guy sitting here telling me that I can go and do bigger and better things. And so I went and talked to him. He gave me a manila envelope. I took it home, and by the time my mother got home from work that day, she saw that envelope, automatically knew what it was, and started crying. And she said, "Blake, can you please just go try college? I mean, it's going to be different for you than high school was." Because, I knew everybody. Like, our minds were made up at a young age that the people we were around had to be our friends, whether we liked them or not, because we didn't really have a lot of options. And she's like, going to college, you're going to be given so many options. You get to pick and choose who you are. And I said, okay, I'll go. I'll give it the old college try. About a month out of high school, I'm at a 4-H state conference in College Station, run into a girl, and we realized that our dads grew up together, and we hadn't seen each other since we were 2. That in turn wound up us dating about a month later, or about 2 weeks later, and that was my first serious relationship. It was the puppy dog love right out of high school. She's going into her senior year of high school, and naturally, that fatherhood instinct, that husband mentality was there. I mean, I'm 18 years old. This girl is just turned 17, and I already have our lives planned out for us. It's like, oh, this could be great. About a month after we got together, I got my first DWI, just before my 19th birthday. And, her dad and my dad, I was doing what they grew up doing. So it's like, how dare you judge me for what I'm doing? And so he's still to this day very, very close, a very dear friend of mine. But I got to college, and that first weekend I get dropped off. I already knew one of my roommates. I met the other one. New roommate has a fake ID. We already know what's going to happen. And so I was the last to pick my schedule, so I had an 8 a.m. on a Monday, freshman year of college. I guarantee you that the first week of that class, I did not even know where the building was. And the first month, I was too hungover to go to class. And so my alcoholism progressed, and she was very adamant, I'm going to college and College Station. We need to just go ahead and end this before it really gets started. And so I was like, well, okay, I'm gonna be lonely, and I'm just gonna drink to hide what all this is going on, because the love of my life just broke up with me. I'm 18, 19 years old. And so, I'm rapidly, drinking. And into that first semester comes up, and my parents were like, guess what? You get to move home. So I did. Well, we'll go ahead and fast forward. Let's see, this was 2017, 2018. We're going to go ahead and go on to 2019. I lived with my parents from after that first semester of college until 2019. And I was in New York and Washington, D.C. for a college trip. I was a public relations and advertising major. And by the end of that trip, we all had internships lined up. And mine was going to be with ABC News. And so, I was like, oh, yes, we get to get out of this small town. We get to go do bigger and better things the military was going to give me. And while I'm gone, my parents own rental property. And they're like, well, Blake, we just bought a duplex. Would you like to move into it whenever you get home? I said, absolutely. I'm good enough to be on my own. I drink every once in a while, but it's okay. And that first night, I am in that new apartment, or in that new duplex. I'm sitting there, I have a six-pack. It's going okay. I'm going to drink a couple of them. I'm going to cook dinner for myself, and I'm going to go to bed. So I thought. That in turn to me taking a picture of the sunrise behind my house, and a kid sending me a Snapchat that I wasn't even friends with in high school, and said, "Oh, you have your own house. Perfect. We're gonna party there tonight." And I was like, I'm not really in a partying mood. And he's like, I'll bring the women and the alcohol. And I said, I'm in a partying mood. And so, not even 5 seconds later, this kid asked me a question that changed my life. He said, one of the guys that's going to come with me wants to know if you mess around with cocaine. I've never touched it in my entire life. Smoked weed a couple times, hated it. Well, what was I going to do? Say no? And so I was like, yeah, why not? And so, little backstory, I was never taught how to do cocaine. I learned how to do it from the movies. You see 3 giant lines of cocaine, that's how you think it's supposed to be done. Well, that was not the way to start that, because I got started up here, and you can only go up from there, which was really down. And so that started a whole new chapter of my life. That was an everyday occurrence for me. I'm spending $1,000 every 3 days. I'm staying up for 3-4 days to a week on a weekly basis. I'm going home from work, drinking, going out, doing drugs all night, going straight back to work. And everybody's like, man, this kid's all lively. This kid's doing good. And I hid that from my family from June until October of 2019. And it was the day of my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. And I wake up late. I'm having to drive 30 minutes to their anniversary party. And I'm sitting in the car with my dad. And I remember this. We're in the driveway of my sister and my soon-to-be brother-in-law's house. And he asked me, and he goes, "Blake, are you doing okay?" I was like, "Yeah. Why do you ask?" And he's like, you just don't seem like yourself. And little does he know, I've dropped all my classes but one. I'm almost to the point of getting fired from said job because I'm sleeping in, or I'm just not going, or I haven't slept, and I was like, I don't want to be around these people because they're going to know. And I tell him, I said, "Dad, I've been hooked on drugs for 6 months. And the reaction that he gave me was not in a list of 100 that I thought was going to be his reaction. I thought it was going to be, I raised you better than that. You're not the kid I raised. It was, okay, let's move you home. Let's work on this. Treatment wasn't pushed down my throat at this point in time. And I remember I went home that night and I started packing my bag to go home, and I get a text, and this text was my screensaver for the longest time, and it said, "You are my greatest accomplishment." And I was like, how can a man who just learned that his son has been hooked on drugs and is continuing to try to screw up his life call that son his greatest accomplishment? I can never pay that man back for the things he's done in my life. So I'm going to have to pull this out because I will lose track of time. All right, we're good. And so I moved home. It progressed. At this point, I have a second DWI, 2 before I was even legally old enough to drink. And, I moved out on my own again. I was like, I'm going to do and sell drugs better than anybody. And I'm going to be the best at it because out of all the things to be the best at, that sounds like a pretty good idea. And, you know, I always say this. The people that I surrounded myself with, I didn't know how to pronounce their name. And they were the type of situations that those phone calls could be made and you're no longer on the face of the earth and no one knows what happened to you. And, you know, you would think that would scare me enough to be like, do you really know who you're getting involved with? But it didn't. It was the thrill of it. You know, I was addicted to the chaos more than I was the drugs at this point. And, you know, my dad showed up at my house one day, and I hadn't slept for about a week and a half. And my front door is wide open. I'm sitting in my apartment doing drugs. And he walks up, and I look up, and the way he talks about it, my face was just white. I mean, I was 109 pounds, soaking wet. And he flat out asked me, he said, Blake, are you on meth? And I said, no, I draw the line at cocaine. I'm a sophisticated drug addict. I'm not trailer trash. And so he tells me, and this is when treatment was offered, and he said, Blake, I think you need to go somewhere. And I was like, look, in my head, I'm like, tell this man whatever he needs to know because you have to be somewhere in 30 minutes, and if you're not there, something bad's going to happen. And I said, look, you set it up, I'll go. The field of dreams, you build it, they'll come. And so he set it up. And Mother's Day weekend of 2021 was my initial sobriety date. I slept through my mom's Mother's Day celebration. I hadn't slept in maybe 2 weeks at this point. And I walked into treatment the day after Mother's Day, and I'm sitting there and I'm nodding off during my intake, and the lady's having to knock on the desk to wake me up. I'd fall asleep in the middle of answering a question. My treatment plan was supposed to be for 28 days. I was not having it. You know, I was only there to, number one, get my parents off my back. Number two, build a tolerance. Number three, might meet some people I could sell drugs to. And so, you know, I'm sitting in this meeting in treatment. Everybody around me they're on fire for this deal. You know, I have veterans in there they're wanting to change their lives for the better. And I'm just sitting here going through the motions, right? It wound up being at day number 25. I was asked to leave because I was being very disrespectful. And so I left. I was through my first 8-ball within 45 minutes. Which, of course, nobody knew that Blake was high. Stayed up all night and decided the next day that I was going to go to the group in Amarillo called Moss Lane and help alcoholics make pancakes at 5 o'clock in the morning and get a sponsor. Because what shows everybody that I'm doing great? Getting a sponsor. To this day, this man loves telling that story that he's like, oh, we knew he was tweaking his balls off. But you know, he had to let me do that. And I was gonna pick up a dirty 30-day chip, and 2 days before that, I decided to drive down to Dallas to pick up a large shipment of drugs, and I got pulled over drinking and driving. Luckily, there were no drugs involved in Sweetwater, and I was supposed to pick up at Abilene. Got arrested for my third DWI, sat in jail for a week, and the only way I was getting out was going to treatment. And this is, you know, where I start to realize, you know, I might be an alcoholic. I have 3 DWIs. I'm 22 years old. And, you know, which I should have known I was an alcoholic, right? Everything I did alcoholically. I did drugs alcoholically. I lied, I stole, I cheated alcoholically. I loved alcoholically, which I later found out is called codependency. Yeah, it's gotten a little bit better with that. But you know, going into treatment, and I'm surrounding myself with people that want to get better. You know, I stepped foot at that so-called undisclosed treatment facility, a little bit outside of town, And the second I stepped out of the car, I felt like I was on holy ground. I had this calm sense of peace come over me, and it was, you're home. And that in turn to me was my very first spiritual experience. Which of course, being there for about a week, being sober, clear-minded, I think I know everything. I'm trying to sponsor people that are coming in the rooms, coming into treatment, when I don't have a sponsor, and I couldn't even recite step 4. About 2 weeks into that, I'm sitting outside the dining hall, and I talk to. There's not a lot of people that I was in treatment with that are still around today, and the ones that were there that are still around describe it the best. That I was sitting outside the dining hall and I had a revelation, and I'm staring out in the sunset. I'm sitting by myself. I have this revelation, and I start laughing hysterically, which, to the guy going through withdrawals and detox, seeing someone that's 2 weeks sober laughing hysterically, it might scare him a little bit. But this is why I started laughing hysterically, is because I realized that I was that lifeguard that didn't know how to swim. I was trying to save everybody when I could barely hold my head above water. And try to rush through this a little bit, and then I'll kind of explain what I kind of boiled that down to. I got out of treatment and met a girl in treatment that it turned out I met her in our addiction. Did not know my real name. And I was like, okay, this lady is working on herself. I'm working on myself. This is great. She relapsed. And I was like, well, a relapse right in front of me with my drug of choice. And I was like, this might not be the best situation to be in at 45 days sober. Called the whole treatment center, sober living. It's like, hey, you might want to come pick me up. And so they did, drug tested me. I was fine. But I keep that mentality in my head that it was like, well, maybe the next woman that walks in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous will be the next future Mrs. Blake Schulte. And there were quite a bit of them, right? Not that I became involved with, but that fleeting thought came through my mind. It's like, oh, it's her, isn't it? It's her, isn't it? She sat by me. She looked like she smiled at me. It's her. It wasn't. A lot of the times it wasn't. I say that I'm 1 for 2 on healthy relationships and recovery. And the first time thought it was going to be great. It was not. Second time I won the lottery. I always like to tell people I look like the Make-A-Wish kid standing next to her, because it's like, what's your final wish? And I was like, oh, this is what I want, and that's what I got blessed with. I'm truly grateful for that. Yes, and if it wasn't for the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, that would not be possible. I cannot be the man that she needs. I can't really speak for her, but I don't really think it'd work very well if either one of us weren't in recovery. But I began sponsoring whenever I got through the 12 steps. And actually, I was on step 10, and my sponsor at the time said, who are you sponsoring? And I said, I got to be through the 12 steps. And he said, where in the book does it say that? Where does it say that? It says at step 12, you go work with others, but it does not say you cannot work with others before you get to step 12. And in that conversation, we got through 10, 11, and 12, and he said, go raise your hand in a meeting and pick up a sponsee. Next day, him and I are driving, and he said, Blake, what step are you on? And I said, don't you remember we finished them last night? And he backhanded me right across the back of the head. And he said, Blake, you are never done working your steps. If anybody asks you what step you're on, you say you work 1 through 12 on a daily basis. And he said, because you're going to work the steps, you're going to die. And he said it in much more colorful language than that. But that's what I needed. It talks about the things in this book are merely suggestions. If I look at these things in this book as suggestions, I'm going to die. And this is where that lifeguard that doesn't know how to swim comes into place, is that whenever I started sponsoring people and actually started sponsoring people and kind of knew what I was doing, but not really, because I learned something new about myself with every person that I got the opportunity to sponsor. And there were some guys it took with, and some of those guys are still sober today. Nobody taught me, no one prepared me for how hard it was going to be to lose my first sponsee of an overdose. It was so hard, and I kept thinking, what could I have done differently? I'm gonna have to tell this person's parents that I couldn't have saved their kid, and I didn't try hard enough. And that's when you're like a lifeguard that didn't know how to swim comes back into my life. And this is really where I took that and ran with it, was because if I have a sponsee that is sitting there drowning, and I jump in and try to save them when I'm not mentally and spiritually fit, we're both drowning. But what I can do is I can take the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I can take what the old timers in these rooms have taught me, and I can say, hey, this is what worked for me, and I can hand it to them as their life preserver. And they can hold their head above water for a minute, and they can say, no, that doesn't work for me, and they can push it away and they can drown. At that point, I can say I did everything I could. I did everything I was taught. I can live with myself, even though it's very hard to do that. And the best part about that is if they hold their head above water and they say, okay, this works for me, then I can stick my hand out and I can pull them in. And that's I've had to take that approach to things, because I've had so many sponsees go back out and I feel like I failed them. And it's very hard for me to get through. And then I've had, in the little over 3 years, 3 months, or 3 years, 11 months, and however many days, I've had some dry periods of sobriety. I'm not gonna lie to you. It hasn't been perfect. It hasn't even. It's sometimes that the only reason why I didn't pick up is because I didn't want to use. Right? My sobriety date is my sobriety date. I don't want to lose it. However, that man that said work the steps or die, drugs and alcohol weren't going to be the death of me. I was going to put a gun in my mouth. Because to me, that seemed like a better route to die sober. To me, that sounded like a better closed casket funeral for my mom to have to sit at, knowing that her son died sober rather than losing him of an overdose. And that when those thoughts pop up, I have a sponsor who has a sponsor who has a sponsor, and I can call upon him. I can call upon anybody that I've grown close to in this program, and the first thing that they're going to say is, "When's the last time you went to a meeting?" If I'm going through a problem, what does the book say about that? I don't know. Well, you didn't look hard enough, and they'll hang up. Call me back when you find out what it says in the book. And when I find out, most of the time I don't call them back because I got the answer I needed. I'll shoot them a little text and say, hey, I appreciate you for pushing me towards the book. I found what I needed. And gosh. I'm listed on the schedule as a YPAW speaker. It's Young People of AA. And I'm very grateful to be one of the. We started the first YPAW group in Lubbock a little over a year ago, and the man that's solely responsible for that group happening is no longer with us. I don't mind saying his name because I feel like if I don't, that's me forgetting the part he played in my life. His name was Thomas Buckner. And he took me and my sponsor at the time to our very first international ICIPAW, International Conference of Young People of AA. It was in New Orleans. And he had just relapsed with 8 years sober. And then he relapsed again right before the conference. He relapsed at the conference. He moved back to North Carolina, and he would call me and he said, Blake, I don't know why I can't get more than 30 days at a time. And I told him, I said, Thomas, it's because you won't have those 8 years back tomorrow. And he stayed in touch with me, and we worked on getting him back to Lubbock. And he actually moved to Europe because he could work remote with the job he had. And, he overdosed one night, left the hospital, and he called, I was working for Stages of Recovery at the time, And he called our head house manager, and he said, I'm coming home. He wasn't from Lubbock, but Lubbock was his home. And he said, okay, I'll pick you up at the airport on Monday. And I'm walking out of class Monday morning, and I actually muttered the words, today is going to be a good day. And I got a text message that said that man overdosed on an opium den in Bangkok 2 days before he was supposed to get on the airplane and died. And me and my sponsor at the time, when we really talked about what we were going to do with this YPAW group, that man, he planted the seed in our heads and in our hearts. And, as somebody that got the opportunity to turn 23, 24, 25, 26 years old in the room of Alcoholics Anonymous, I can't think of a better sister program to have a hand in starting in the city of Lubbock. I mean, right down the street from Texas Tech. We get a lot of recovery students. We get some people that aren't young, and it's okay because it's the young, wild, and free group of YPAW. You don't have to be young. You don't even have to be wild, but as long as you're free. That's all that matters, right? And, free from the hopeless state of mind and body of alcohol and drugs. And even if you're not, if you want to be free, then there's a home for you. And that's why I'm truly grateful for AA, YPAW, CA. I can't, any type of anonymous meeting that I can possibly think of, my butt needs to find a seat in that room. Because, Codependency Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, anything that I can really think of, I need it. And even if I don't feel like I need it, and if there's a meeting that I can share something, then I'm robbing the next alcoholic, the next drug addict for not sitting in that room and sharing. Because I don't know if there's something that I can say that'll help that person with what they're going through. And and I shared, I come from a large family of Catholics. My dad has 5 sisters. I have a total of 13 cousins on my dad's side of the family. And I guess no one knew what television was when they were growing up because there's a lot of them. The baby making process is fun, but I don't really think I'm ready to be a dad. I had told my uncle this a long time ago, and I told him again this past weekend. We're sitting in the pool of his wife's retirement party, and I have his son, my younger cousin, his daughter, my oldest cousin, his 2 grandbabies swimming in that pool, my sister, my nephew. There's generations of our family sitting right here in front of us. And I told him, and I said, you know what? I said, I told you this years ago. And I said, I will stand behind this every day, all day, twice on Sundays. And that is that if my higher power, who I choose to call God, were to show himself to me and say, Blake, there's only one way to keep everybody that you love from having to go through the same life that you did. And that's for you to wake up in the morning and it be 2019 all over again. For it to be June 5th of 2019, you have to wake up and you have to make every single decision and go through every single hardship all over again. And it's the same outcome. All you have to do is live through it again. And I would go back and do that every single day to keep the people I love from having to go through that. Because my family came down. I was picking up my 90-day chip, and this was not the meeting to have my family of normies come down to. I have people picking up chips. I have people presenting chips. And everybody's sitting there talking about how it's not really war stories, but it's stories that normal people don't know how to understand. And we're laughing about it. And we get in the car, and my mother, she looks back at me and she goes, "How could y'all laugh about that?" She's like, Blake, we survived your alcoholism. I mean, I stole from my mother, and my dad put hands on me, and I put me and my dad down a flight of stairs. And the worst thing I ever told my father that night is I looked at him in the face, and I said, your father died an alcoholic, and your son's going out the exact same way. Which, I was wrong, because my grandfather died sober. He died of cancer, but he died sober 11 months before I was born. And, which really, I wasn't, it was very vulgar, and that is a living amends that I have to make to my father on a daily basis. But in all reality, I wasn't wrong. Because, well, I was wrong because his father didn't die an alcoholic. But I wasn't wrong to say that his son was winding up the exact same way. His son is now a recovering alcoholic. His son is now a recovering drug addict. His son gets to be a nephew, or he gets to be a uncle to a nephew whose life he would not have the privilege to be a part of if he would have not gotten sober. And with a few minutes to spare, I'm going to go ahead and share this because after this, I get to go home, take the jacket off, untuck my shirt, and drive to Amarillo for this kid's 3rd birthday party. You know, and the day he was born, I was in Amarillo at a meeting that my sponsor at the time was sharing at. And I didn't know where he was speaking, and we pull up, and it's suddenly I realized where I'm at. And it was a group called My Next Step in Amarillo. And only reason I remember that is because I was going to a therapist that was going to help me cure all my problems without going to treatment. And she said, Blake, you know, there's some really solid recovery in Amarillo if you would just go and you would just learn. I couldn't walk in the door of one of those places without being 3 sheets to the wind. I had to go through an entire 8-ball in the parking lot just to get the courage to walk through the door. And have to wear a mask because my nose is running and tell people that I don't want to catch COVID. But, you know, I'm sitting in this room not maybe 2 years later. You know, everything in my life comes full circle. And I'm sitting in this room, and my phone buzzes. It doesn't ring because my phone's on silent. I'm in a meeting. My phone buzzes. And I get to see the picture of this beautiful little boy. And I get to realize that this is a life that I would not have been a part of. You know, and I thank God for his timing. Because if it would have happened a year earlier, that wouldn't have gotten me sober. You know, I told my brother-in-law and my sister on their wedding day, when I am cross-faded and not even being able to stand up straight and slurring my words, the day that I find out that I'm going to be an uncle will be the day that things change for me. That wouldn't have changed anything. I had to be broken, and I had to be willing, and I didn't even have to be physically able to walk through the doors. I just had to be willing. I could have stumbled in here, but I could have been willing. And I mean, you know, honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness is truly what I have to rely on a daily basis. Because if I'm not honest, then I'm being dishonest. If I'm not being open-minded, then I'm being reluctant. And if I'm not being willing, then what's the point? Right? Because if I'm not going to be willing to do this, then I mean, I can't just go through the motions. You know, the days that I don't feel willing are the days that I should be in meetings. Absolutely. Are the days that I should be in meetings getting solution. But those are the days that I isolate myself. Those are the days that, you know, I don't really want to be around other people because I don't want to rub off my negative energy onto the newcomer. But those are also the days that I have to pick myself up on my bootstraps, and I have to realize that newcomer needs somebody in there to share their experience, strength, and hope with them. And I will close with this, because I didn't realize it on the schedule that I was the only one given 45 minutes, which is perfect. Because Ernie knows that if I'm given an hour, we would have stayed in the problem for about 30 more minutes than we did. But, I'll go ahead and share this. And, I usually, whenever I share, I usually end with the story of the alcoholic in the hole. That's usually one of my favorite things to end with. But, I'm sitting there earlier today, and I'm just asking God, I said, what moment in my recovery is the best possible memory to share on? And I remember on Wednesdays while I was in treatment, they would shuttle a few of us to IOP. And there's an old timer in there. This is the very first time, I met really anybody in Lubbock recovery outside of treatment. His name's Todd. And, Todd, he sat there and he shared, and he ended with this poem, and it's called The Man in the Glass. And it goes, when you get what you want in your struggle for self and the world makes you king for a day, then go to the mirror and look at yourself and see what that man has to say. For it isn't a man's father, mother, or wife whose judgment upon him must pass. The fellow whose verdict counts most in life is a man staring back from the glass. He's a fellow to please, never mind all the rest, for he's with you clear to the end, and you've passed your most dangerous, difficult test if the man in the glass is your friend. You can fool the whole world down the pathway of years and get pats on the back as you pass, but the final reward will be heartache and tears if you cheated the man in the glass. And even reading that, I don't think that I've even thought about that memory in a year and a half, 2 years. And just reading that and putting my mind back in that place, reminding me that I was 20 days sober. I thought I was fully set and realized that I was heading to prison. Because they originally offered me 2 to 10 in prison for a third DWI. And I got blessed with a year of probation. I can't stress enough how grateful I am to have got this at a young age. Because if I'm being honest, I wouldn't have lasted out there very much longer than I did. If I would have followed through with that trip that I was making, that wouldn't be a possible prison sentence. They would have buried me under it because of the things that I was set out to do. But I love quoting this because it reminds me of how grateful I am to have sobered up young. And because everybody used to always say, you don't have very much life experience. You're 20-something years old. You've only been legally old enough to drink for a year. You're not missing out on something. And I love quoting Harrison Ford and Indiana Jones, and it said, it's not the years, honey, it's the mileage. That's all I've got. Thank y'all.